Welcome to Real Scoop Live, a show for pool chemistry enthusiasts where we talk about all the coolest chemistry stuff you never knew you wanted to know. Any chemical advice or suggestions are opinion and utilized at the discretion of each individual pool operator. With that out of the way, let's start the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Real Scoop Live with Stacy and the boys. The boys being Brett Peterman and Matt Rybar, and obviously Stacy being myself. You guys are in for a thrill today. And as Brett said, we might have sold you the whole seat, but you're only going to need the edge because today we're talking about the much anticipated topic of ammonia and nitrates. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the pros. Take it away, guys.
All right, thank you, Stacy.
Good morning, good evening, or good night, depending on what time you're watching this.
That's right. That's right. So we have teased the ammonia and the nitrates in multiple episodes of RSL already, and we finally got our act together, dealing with all the stuff that we've been dealing with this year in the season 2021, to have some time together to talk about the dreaded ammonia and nitrates. And we did a lot of research. I do have to admit that Brett did more research than I did. And is probably going to be able to tell that during this. But Brett, why don't you, because ammonia kind of goes into nitrates, let's start with ammonia, where it comes from, and how we can mess with it. So do you want to give us kind of a background?
Absolutely. It's been a big issue in the Midwest where I am this year, specifically with people with problem pools that have ammonia. And one of the first questions that I get from everybody is generally, where is it coming from? And actually, I might share a little picture here real quick. Momentito here, but long story short, it's coming from. Bum, bum, bum. Your friendly neighborhood farmers.
We're all on our edge of our seat.
I know. Agriculture. Ammonia is actually one of the most readily used fertilizers. It's nitrogen-based for the plants. They apply it in the spring and the fall. If they do it in the spring, it's generally before planting, which is, oddly enough, about when we start opening pools. Wonder where the stuff is coming from. It's used all over the place. It's actually one of the most prevalent fertilizers used now. And actually what they used to use before is manure. So manure also has the things in fertilizer that ammonia does to keep your plants growing. We might get more into that a little bit later.
Yeah. Hey, it's not an RSL unless we talk about poop, right? At some point in time.
There's a button idea. There's a T-shirt. Did we talk about poop? Mm-mm.
I thought you were going to say there's a button there. I was going to say no, don't say that. Okay, keep on.
So in general, they spray the fields with ammonia to fertilize it. It can actually get aerosolized up into the air. When it gets up in the air, anytime it rains, it can actually grab a hold of the raindrops on the way down and get everywhere. So fertilizer leads to it getting up into the air, ends up to rainstorms, ends up to getting into your pool. Once it's in your pool, we'll start talking a little bit more about the nitrogen cycle and what happens to ammonia once it's in the water, what it's doing to your chemistry, what you have to do to deal with it, and ultimately, hopefully, a couple different ways you can resolve some of the issues that come about from it.
But wait, what if I'm a homeowner that's not next to farm fields? How do I get it?
Well, you
besides the rain.
You can get it from animals. You can get it from neighborhood fertilizers. So like lawn services, anybody has treated lawns or anything like that, same type of chemical that ends up going into the air around where you are. You'd be surprised at how far this stuff can travel in the air. We've even had, you hate to hear about it, but the fires out in the south of the United States right now, we're getting smoke advisories and fog advisories and things like that from 15 states over right now. So it could travel a long way, and the fallout can happen a great deal away from where it's actually being applied to.
So I was in New England a couple weeks ago, probably a month ago. It was at the beginning of July, and one morning I was outside of Boston, and the newscasters were talking about how the smog that everyone was dealing with that day was from the Oregon fire. And so we're in Boston, and we're getting haze from an Oregon fire. That's how far it goes. And just to follow up with that, typically when you fly into, I always fly Southwest. I'm not promoting them. I'm just saying for context. I was flying into Midway on the way back from Boston, and typically when you fly in from east to west, if you sit on the right side of the plane, you can see downtown Chicago displayed in all its glory. I mean, it is fabulous when you fly into Midway. This time, because of the smoke, I could barely see the skyline, which is huge. The amount of debris and ash and everything else that was up in the atmosphere. But what I was getting at, that's just for context. But what I was getting at is that if you are talking about, like, say you don't live on a golf course, you don't live in the farm fields, you live in a suburb, and you're like, well, how am I getting nitrates other than the rain? I mean, there's smog. I mean, you can just look over the top of, if you can see a long view, typically you can see this brown coloration that's right close to the ground. That's the kind of smog that you get that typically wouldn't be in your pool unless it's brought in some way, meaning either wind or rain. But if you talk about urine and you talk about sweat and how urine and sweat are virtually the same thing, the only difference is the concentration of it. Well, if you have a homeowner who is mowing their lawn that's just been sprayed by a lawn service or fertilized by himself, he gets hot. What is he going to do? I'm going to jump in the pool because that's why I have a pool, right? So I can cool off. Well, now not only are you introducing the stuff that kicked up on your legs and everything else from mowing the lawn, but you're also introducing sweat that has dried on your skin. That sweat contains ammonia and nitrates. And so what we're talking about is you jump in and you're causing a chlorine demand issue because of your contaminant load. Now, heaven forbid, he's like most people, and he has a couple of adult beverages while he's mowing, and then when he's in the pool, he thinks, well, no one's going to know, and he just lets it go from the other end too. Well, then now you're talking about adding even more of a contaminant load, right? And I'm talking about if he has to urinate instead of, a lot of times,
and
I don't know about you guys, but
Matt, just to add in there,
yeah,
two different types of contaminants.
Yes.
You're dealing with now organic contaminants and inorganic contaminants, which can kind of determine what happens with the chlorine in the water.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for stopping me finishing that story. I appreciate it because it wasn't going someplace.
I knew where it was going.
Thank you. So the thing about ammonia is that when ammonia, there's different types of ammonia. There's beneficial ammonia and there's non-beneficial ammonia. The beneficial ammonia is pretty much the stuff that you would find in like quaternary ammonia compounds. So like typical algicides, like the 30s, 10, 20, 40, the polyquat ammonium compound, the 60. So, but then there's also ammonium chloride that you find in chlorine products or chlorine enhancers that typically treat yellow or even green. Those are, when those come in contact with chlorine, they create monochloramines. The monochloramines actually can kill yellow and green algae much faster, which is awesome. They also go away with breakpoint chlorination. So that's great. As long as you can figure out what breakpoint chlorination is, it's not exactly, it's not as cut and dry as the typical formula that's out there that a lot of people know, because you have to consider that the 10 times higher than whatever your combined chlorine is, that 10 times higher has to be effective chlorine. And there's a lot of different factors that make that chlorine effective or not effective, right? So that's one part of it. But yeah, they can be treated with breakpoint chlorination. But then there's also inorganic chloramines that are generally happen with organic waste that forms that inorganic chloramine which is nitrogen, a nitrogen-based waste. So you're talking about urine, sweat, and manure, other stuff like that. So that stuff is the stuff that we're constantly dealing with, especially in the Midwest, when people say, well, I'm not getting a chlorine reading, I'm putting in a bunch of chlorine, I'm shocking like crazy, and then I'm still not getting a chlorine reading.
Pools being completely unresponsive.
Mm-hmm. Unresponsive. So going out of the officiality of what we're talking about, there are different ways that service companies across the Midwest treat those pools, right? Most of the time, the way to get along the lines of that, especially when you've done shock after shock after shock, and it still is not coming down, you can tell the difference between organic chloramines and inorganic chloramines by virtue of doing a total chlorine test and a free chlorine test, whatever the difference is, that's the chloramine. If you reach breakpoint chlorination based on that chloramine, and the next day you still have a combined chlorine reading, you know that combined chlorine reading is now inorganic chloramines, not organic chloramines, because organic chloramines will get burned out, but the inorganic chloramines won't. So whatever's left over is what you're dealing with. And so that's where you decide, okay, well, how do I get rid of this? There's certain people that will say, well, instead of screwing around with it, let's just hit it with a chlorine bomb. And what's a chlorine bomb? Well, it's a gallon of liquid chlorine per 1,000 gallons of pool water, all at the same time, all at night. Now, a lot of people that hear this will be like, ooh, I don't want to do that.
I've got a 30,000 gallon pool.
Right.
I got 30 gallons going in?
Yeah, but what I've found over the course of the last 10 years with API and 9 years with SCP, with Pool Corp as the chemical specialist, is that works about 95% of the time. And the thing about using it is that we recommend, actually we don't recommend to do it, but if you were to do it, I would recommend using liquid chlorine, because the amount of chlorine in liquid chlorine, the amount of chlorine delivered is actually more than other shock products. But you can also use non-chlorine shock, and you can also use, if you can find it, by the way, and you can also use Cloud Out, which is a product from API which works wonders for that. You just have to buy a lot of it, or excessive amounts of Easy Pool. So any one of those three will work on it. You can also go to a UV system or an ozone system, but those are much more expensive than just using Easy Pool or the liquid chlorine bomb. But that's all ways to get rid of it. Now, if you and I'll shut up, Brett. Sorry. The one other part of this is that if you listen to some of the hierarchy of the chemical industry, what they'll say is that the fastest way to get rid of this kind of thing, it's, if you're dealing with inorganic chloramines, is to dilute the water. And that's true. But there's a lot of places that you can't do that anymore. Or if you do, you have to pay for sewage costs and all the other stuff.
Or if you've just got homeowners that absolutely refuse to drain their pool, like the
people
with 300 parts per million of cyanuric acid that just said, I'm not draining it. I've had this same water.
No, I've never heard that
30
before.
years. I'm not draining.
Right. Well, it's the old school people that think, well, chlorine and acid fixes everything, or people that have one-piece fiberglass pools that don't want to drain their pool, or people that have liners that are a few years old that they know if they drain their water, they have to get a new liner because the liner's going to get all messed up, or above ground pools, all that stuff is all factors to consider about how to treat your pool. Okay, sorry, diatribe over. Go ahead, Brett.
Oh, you're good. So ammonia in the water over time can actually ammonia in the soil after they've treated it can turn into nitrate, and then it can turn into nitrite and then nitrate. Those can actually run off and get into source water. So if you are filling from a well or anything like that, it's possible you could actually be putting nitrates into your pool from your source water. Now Matt's got some data on parts per million of what's recommended for drinking water and other things like that. I think it's 10 parts per million, but it's different everywhere you go. You want to talk a little bit about nitrates and how we get rid of them if we can?
Yeah, so nitrates are typically 10 parts per million is the highest that you'd want it. Overall, 10 parts per million is kind of like the dividing line. But the thing about it is that when you're talking about nitrates as not, what did you call it, Brett? Not an old wives' tale, but like the going theory amongst people that, like industry veterans?
Oh, things that have worked from the field.
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
something along those lines.
Yeah, something along those lines. So what happens essentially is that if you have 10 parts per million of nitrates, that means you need 10% more chlorine to keep the chlorine residual. So anything above that, 10% really isn't that big of a deal. You can kind of flub your way through that. But if you get into the 25% or 25 parts per million of nitrates, and you think, okay, well, 25%, or 25 parts per million, that doesn't seem like it's a lot, but actually it is, because 25 parts per million actually means you need 25% more chlorine to keep a chlorine residual. So if you think about that in a symbiotic relationship or a cyclical relationship, then essentially what you're doing is you're having to put in, if you typically would use 4 tabs per pool, you need to put in 5 tabs per pool. And if you put in 5 tabs per pool, how much more cyanuric acid are you putting in, which then lowers the efficiency of the chlorine. So then you have to put in more chlorine, like what we were talking about a couple weeks ago or a couple episodes
Cyclical,
ago.
it just keeps getting worse and compounding on top of itself.
Right,
And then
right.
balance comes in, because if your balance is off, your chlorine isn't working effectively either. So
Yeah.
how
So
many different
remember last
variables
time,
do you want to have to work on?
Exactly. And we're talking about the 7.5% principle from the cyanuric acid, that, and then the nitrates, and then it's like, well, I'm using 10 tablets just to keep a chlorine residual of 3. Or we'll get a call and they'll say, hey, I'm putting in a whole bunch of chlorine, I'm still not getting a chlorine reading. Well, these are all the things to consider. Is it organic ammonia, or organic chloramines, inorganic chloramines? What's your cyanuric acid reading? What's your nitrate reading? And then that's how we have to figure out how to treat the pool.
And there was one pool I helped recently. Sorry for the brief story time, but they called. They'd had an issue with a sprinkler system, and it had a bunch of runoff that actually ran right into their pool. It turned a gray, milky, ugly, disgusting, not happy color. They ended up putting about 25 pounds of cal hypo in, and this is maybe an 20,000 gallon pool, and it didn't touch it. It didn't do a darn thing. So when they called, they said, what's the next step? And I said, well, you've tried several of the things already just by hitting it that hard. Test for ammonia, test for nitrates. Let's see what your combined chlorine is, and go from there. They had a combined chlorine of 4 parts per million. They had an ammonia reading of 2 parts per million, and they had nitrates of, I believe it was 25 or 30. I can't recall, but if you do the math to figure out how much chlorine you'd actually need to break all of those things, it would probably void the warranty on every piece of equipment on that pool. There'd probably just be shreds of the liner left after you're done. It's just like he ended up draining it, refilling it, and the pool's been crystal clear since then. It was all issue from the runoff from the lawn going in. Sometimes it sucks, but that's the easiest way to go about it. And if you are in areas with high water tables or worries about popping your pool out, you can do it gradually. Just do a foot at a time. It's going to take longer, because when you're diluting it like that, you're actually throwing away some of the fresh water the next day when you're draining as well.
Right.
But you can gradually bring it down as long as you're refilling with water that has less amounts of nitrate or ammonia in it, because we're actually getting reports from different areas that source water can have nitrates and ammonia in it as well, in addition to chloramines, which they're actually using to sanitize water, because they last longer in the water lines from the treatment plant to your house. Because technically chloramines are a sanitizer, just not good enough for pools.
Right. And that's organic chloramines, not inorganic chloramines. So those are the ones that can be broken down by breakpoint chlorination. Now, so let's wrap this all up, okay? Basically what we're saying is this: if you're using an ammonia-based pool product, that contributes to organic chloramines, which is fine. That can be taken care of with breakpoint chlorination. The problem is that if your homeowner or your service company is not reaching breakpoint chlorination, then you'll actually have an ammonia reading in there, or ammonia present in the water, which then can contribute to the contaminant load. So that's why breakpoint chlorination is so important. Inorganic chloramines revert to nitrates, again, add to the contaminant load of the pool. So if that happens, then you have to reach many breakpoint chlorinations, or a chlorine bomb, or go to the next point, which is to use either a UV system, an ozone system, or to get on the Easy Pool program, because
Or a
when
non-chlorine
you
shock, or
or non-chlorine shock, yeah, if you can get it. But the Easy Pool program, that's like having an ozonator that actually has a residual, because it increases the active oxygen in the water and makes it so that when you have the air pollution, the rain, the storms, the people, urinating, peeing, or not urinating and peeing, or sweating in the water and things like that, because of the active oxygen that's generated by the Easy Pool, you don't have these ongoing issues. So that's it. We want to keep these Real Scoop Lives kind of in the 15 to 20 minute range, so that way you don't get bored. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, feel free to email us at Stacy.
customersupport@apiwater.com.
Right. So check us out on all social media, and also remember that we have a blog written by our industry veteran Rick Hamilton called Rick's Remedies, that can be found both on social media and on apiwater.com. Anything else for you guys?
I don't have anything.
I think that's it for me.
All right. So stay tuned for another episode of Real Scoop Live. Thank you for joining us this time. Like I said, let us know what you think. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.